It has been almost 48 hours since 4 planes piloted by terrorists changed the landscape of New York City, Washington, and the psyche of this nation.
As we go into a third day, we're going to be hearing from our correspondents on every painful angle of this story, from the search for survivors, suspects, and the answer to the question why. You're looking at a live picture from the site of the World Trade Center concourse, scene of Tuesday's devastating terrorist attacks.
It doesn't even really begin to tell the full story, Vince. So much is happening on the ground right now. Our correspondents are also in Washington, where security remains very tight. Now here you are looking at the Pentagon, and searchers there have been working through the night. You can actually get a sense of the extent of the damage to the building in this live shot, still part of it collapsing there. I'm Carol Lynn at the CNN Center in Atlanta. Thank you so much for joining our 24-hour coverage of this series of events that, frankly, have shaken the United States.
No question about that. I'm Vince Cellini. This incredible tragedy stays with us. The images now seared into our memories. This is the crash of that second airliner into one of the World Trade Center towers. Federal investigators say as many as 50 people may have helped plan and carry out the terrorist attacks.
The Twin Towers of the World Trade Center once stood a quarter-mile into the sky. Now officials are predicting the collapse of those two 110-story towers has left thousands of people dead. The scene of what was once a symbol of America's financial influence on the world is simply stunning right now. It is bleak, almost like a nuclear winter.
A White House spokesman says there is, quoting here, real and credible information that the plane that hit the Pentagon initially was headed for the White House. The FBI is working on the assumption that as many as 24 hijackers and twice as many associates were involved in these attacks.
And helping us staff our 24-hour-a-day operation is Garrick Utley. He is standing by on the rooftop of our New York bureau with a great vantage point to the damage there. Good morning, Garrick.
Good morning, Carol and Vince. What can we say about these early morning hours? Well, first of all, quite different from what the last 24, nearly 48 hours have been like. If Tuesday was obviously a horrendous day for people in this metropolis, Wednesday wasn't that much easier. The shock of Tuesday, the numbness that brought was started to wear off, but in its place came the awareness of the true cost and what had been lost, and the grieving really started. People are trying to digest it. And so although the city began to return to a more normal life or a pace here, the streets were still not filled to that extent as they are on normal work days or weekdays here in New York City. And you could see it on people's faces. There was still that sense of how could this have happened and where do we go from here? For example, in the late evening hours of Wednesday, there was a bomb scare here right next to our CNN office on 34th Street. The bomb scare in the Empire State Building, which is at 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Police, fire department units raced in. People were pushed away. Also a bomb scare emptied much of Penn Station nearby, one of the main transportation hubs, and people were even told to get off trains that were standing there at Penn Station. After about an hour of searching, there was no bomb, and the people were allowed to continue with their more or less normal lives in New York City. But of course, in the lower part of Manhattan, down there at the tip where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center used to stand, there is now, as we know, only rubble. And Alicio Vinci of CNN is standing by to give us the later there. Alicio?
Well, Garrick, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed almost 48 hours ago, but as you can see from behind me here, a thick white and high cloud of smoke still building on top of the wreckage of those two towers. Metal and iron parts of those two towers are still smoldering and rendering very difficult and indeed dangerous for the rescue workers there to be nearby to try to remove some of the debris and try to find out if perhaps some people may still be alive underneath those two 110 stories buildings. Some of the other buildings surrounding nearby are also unstable and indeed making the search and rescue operation extremely dangerous. We saw earlier several refrigerator trucks arriving at the scene. Perhaps those trucks will be filled with some bodies or body parts to be brought to the morgue. We also saw a long line of dumpster trucks. Those dumpster trucks will be filled with some of the debris and be taken away to a different locations on some barges to make some room for the rescue operation to proceed. We understand that more than 3,000 tons of debris have already been removed. The last official counts of the casualties, 82 dead, 16 of them only so far have been identified. The rescuers with whom we'll be able to speak on the phone earlier telling us that mainly they're recovering body parts, not full bodies. And of course, the number of victims is expected to increase as the rescue operation continues. Mayor Giuliani of New York said that asked the Federal Emergency Management Agency here to send 6,000 body bags. So we're still Mr. Giuliani expecting that body count to really increase. Garrick?
Alicio, rescue workers have said it may take 30 to 60 days to really get through that rubble looking for survivors if there are any significant numbers, otherwise the dead. And you just mentioned that of the 82 dead, only 16 have been identified. Obviously, this is going to be a very difficult job. To what extent do you believe, or have you heard indeed, that they're really going to have to rely on DNA and other kinds of records? And to what extent will that slow down the process of identification?
Well, Garrick, they've been digging now for more than a day, or almost a day, and they only found 82 bodies that they were able to, 82 bodies and only 16 to be identified. This tells us the intensity of this crash, the entire 2 stories collapsing within an hour of each other. So certainly what the rescuers are telling us right now is that they only are finding bad body parts, and the only thing that they will be able to identify some of the victims, just the dental records, perhaps some watches or some rings or wedding bands, or even some documents, all these kind of things that will be able to tell the rescue officials who was indeed in that building at the moment that it collapsed.
Alicio, thank you very much for that report. We'll be back to you for updates as we go further into the early morning hours. And it should also be noted that officials, city and state and even federal officials, are still not even attempting to give any precise prediction or estimate as to how many may be dead in there. They simply speak, once again, of thousands, horrendous numbers in the words of the mayor of New York City. Back now to you, Vince.
All right, thank you, Garrick. We'll be checking in with you throughout this morning. And now to the Pentagon. In fact, inside that damaged building, CNN's Mark Potter is there with more on the search and the investigation. Mark?
Well, Vince, Pentagon officials are saying that it will take months, if not years, to repair the damage from this horrible attack on this building. At this hour, at this early hour this morning, workers are still on the scene. The area lit up by big floodlights. Officials say the fires are out now, although there still are a few hot spots for them to deal with occasionally. Workers are shoring up the building as needed so that they can move further into the rubble. They're looking for bodies, and they say they do not believe that there are any survivors to be found. The estimated death toll here now is around 200, including the 64 people who were on the plane. Now, joining the workers are FBI agents who are looking for evidence to support a criminal case. Officials are also looking for the black boxes from the American Airlines 757, the voice and data recorders. They hope that those boxes, if they are found, will shed light on how the hijacking occurred and whether the White House may have actually been the original target of the hijackers rather than the Pentagon. That suggestion coming from the White House spokesman. Now, about half of the entire Pentagon complex is shut down now because of damage from the attack and the fire and the smoke. Thousands of employees will have to work in temporary offices because of this, and that includes the chiefs of the Army and the Navy. Nevertheless, Pentagon officials say the building will be fully operational later today with all employees expected, all available employees expected to report for work later today. Back to you, Vince.
All right, thank you very much, Mark Potter at the Pentagon. Carol?
Vince, outside of that building, there is a woman who is standing vigil, waiting to see if her husband withstood and survived that terrorist attack at the Pentagon. CNN's Elizabeth Cohen tells her story.
Andrew Zucker started his day Tuesday on the 86th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. After the first explosion, the one in the North Tower, his wife called.
And he said, I'm okay, I'll call you back, and he hung up.
But then his building blew up.
If I know Andrew, he stopped to help somebody, and I don't even want to think about what happened, and I don't know what happened to him, but he's just not here.
but thinks she must because, like many people who stood in line to find out about their missing loved ones, Erica says she still thinks her husband may still be alive. So while Erica worked the phones Wednesday, her sister, Naomi Konovich, and family friend Susan Feldman went out on a search, one hospital at a time, starting at New York University Medical Center, where there were no answers.
Bellevue, I think, is on like 27th. It's only like 3 or 4 more blocks down.
After Bellevue, on to Beekman Hospital. No one had seen him there either.
Someone told us actually to go over to the medical examiner's office.
They told Naomi to gather dental records and hair samples in case they'd have to identify his body.
They don't have lists of people who were found dead. They don't have anything.
Late in the day, after buying a mask to keep out the dust circulating after all the explosions, she checked yet more public offices. Still, no one had heard of Andrew Zucker.
They said there were a couple of John Does in the hospital. We're hoping to find that maybe one of them is him.
In the end, a frustrated Naomi distributed flyers to the media.
He's about 6'1", heavy set with the big shoulders and a big chest.
While her sister kept up the round of calls to the hospitals, to the morgue.
If you do see him or you're with him, just tell him we all love him and just to hold in there. And we just want him to come home. We need him to come home.
Elizabeth Cohen, CNN, New York.
Well, there are other stories of hope mixed with pain. One comes from the Irish Times newspaper and one of its American correspondents. The newspaper reports that John Clifford of Ireland learned that his brother Ronnie Clifford was among those who got out of the World Trade Center just in time. However, hours later, John Clifford got the bad news. His sister, Ruth McCourt, and her daughter, Juliana, were among those on one of the planes that slammed into one of the towers.
Well, Vince, there are so many stories coming out of this horror. Now, while grateful to be alive, some survivors are actually coping with guilt. CNN's Maria Hinojosa spoke with people who made it out of the World Trade Towers.
The onlookers, safe behind police barricades, release their emotions through applause for the rescue workers. But for the survivors who were closer to ground zero, mixed emotions.
I saw my family, my wife and the 2 kids. Baby that's 1 year old and the 4-year-old. And I just saw them and I was just running towards the light.
Benjamin Fogel was right outside the building when it imploded. So survivors come to terms with what gave them the strength to make it out.
The plane is making impact. It's just coming in and it's like shattered glass. Multiply the sum by 1 billion.
Judith Francis escaped through some back door steps.
And you're like, don't look back, don't look up. Just keep going, don't run. It felt like a thunder of elephants just coming.
Many survivors spent yesterday in shock. Today, for some, that shock gave way to anger.
If I made it from 105th floor, many, many more people could have made it down. And Port Authority was announcing over the speaker over and over again, everything is fine, we are secure.
In the wreckage, she may have lost dozens of co-workers.
People had a chance to get out. And people went and sat back down and went up to get their purse and went back, for silly things.
Downtown near Ground Zero, Maureen Raffoni tries to make it to her apartment just 1 block away from where the tower stood, with no luck.
So you're looking at not going home for 2 or 3 days?
She feels guilty these days for everything.
You don't want to be narcissistic, and be like, oh, my belongings, oh, my apartment is trashed. The reality is I'm alive, and those poor people that didn't get out, I just pray for them.
As the rescue workers file in, hoping against hope for more survivors, those who did make it through move into numbness.
I can't find words to describe it anymore. It's just the pain that I feel inside. I can't really label it.
For the survivors, theirs is a gift of life, but it's a gift wrapped in pain and sorrow. How could they have survived when so many others didn't? Maria Hinojosa, CNN, New York.
The nation's airlines are gearing up to resume commercial flights this morning. Here's what we know so far about their plans. Travelers encouraged to check with individual airlines for specifics. Some airlines, like Delta, say they will remain grounded through the end of the day, while others, including U.S. Airways and Northwest, are resuming limited schedules. When flights do resume, expect much tighter security measures. New check-in procedures will include more thorough searches, no more curbside services and remote check-ins, and a total ban on knives. Now, we have dramatic new details from the final moments of United Airlines Flight 93. That was the hijacked airliner that crashed in the field in Pennsylvania. The clues come from the cockpit transmissions and cell phone calls made by passengers. CNN's Kelly Arena has this story.
Sometime before United Airlines Flight 93 went down in Pennsylvania, a microphone in the cockpit was left open. Air traffic controllers heard shouting, someone yelling, "Get out of here!" The microphone is momentarily turned off. It comes back on. Scuffling is heard, and again, a voice yells, "Get out of here!" The microphone is again turned off. When it's turned on again, it is clear the pilot is no longer in the cockpit. Someone is heard speaking in broken English, in what was described as an Arabic accent, telling passengers, quote, "There is a bomb on board. This is the captain speaking. Remain in your seat. There is a bomb on board. Stay quiet. We are meeting their demands. We are returning to the airport." While this was going on in the cockpit, we have information about what was happening in the cabin. One passenger, 31-year-old Jeremy Glick, was flying with his 2-month-old child. He called home from the doomed plane. He said the passengers were herded to the rear of the plane by a trio of hijackers, armed with knives and a red box they say contained a bomb. When Glick's family confirmed for him what another passenger heard, that a plane had already struck the World Trade Center, Glick dropped the phone, then returned to tell his family the male passengers had taken a vote to attack the hijackers. Glick wasn't heard from again. The plane held 38 passengers and a crew of 8. Kelly Arena, CNN, Washington.
An American flag is standing unfurled on the side of the Pentagon this morning. It is just one of many signs of resolve in the face of Tuesday's deadly terrorist attacks. And more, the Bush administration is talking about a military response. CNN military affairs correspondent Jamie McIntyre brings us an update.
There are still some smoldering embers in the rubble that was once the Navy wedge of the Pentagon, seen here in a commercial satellite photograph. But after more than 24 hours, the fire was basically out. The intense heat and smoky blaze that resulted from a fully fueled jetliner crashing into the building convinced Pentagon officials that anyone who might have survived the initial impact could not have survived the fire. The death toll, feared to be as high as 800, now looks as though it may be just over 200, including the 64 people on the plane.
From everything that we currently know, the estimate that's been widely reported is considerably high, and we certainly pray that that's the case.
The attack penetrated 3 of the Pentagon's 5 rings, and the fire spread through the wooden roof. For now, roughly 1/2 of the Pentagon is closed, sealed off by armed sentries posted at all 5 rings on all 5 floors. Now the search is for evidence. FBI agents lined up to slowly comb the area, looking for pieces of plane wreckage. It will take months, if not years, to repair the damage to the Pentagon. And thousands of Pentagon workers, including the chiefs of the Army and Navy, have been relocated to temporary offices. In a recorded message to U.S. troops, Secretary Rumsfeld again hinted military retaliation is coming.
It is my duty as head of this department to tell you that more, much more, will be asked of you in the weeks and months ahead. This is especially true of those who are in the field. We face powerful and terrible enemies, enemies we intend to vanquish, so that moments of horror, like yesterday, will be stopped.
So far, the only military deployments are defensive. An aircraft carrier off the coast of New York is one of dozens of ships patrolling the east and west coasts. Air National Guard planes are flying protective cover over major U.S. cities.
Rumsfeld warned that a military campaign against terrorists and their supporters will be neither easy nor quick. It will take, he said, a sustained and broadly based effort. But will it work, he was asked. His reply, only time will tell. Jamie McIntyre, CNN, The Pentagon.
And now to the search for suspects. Law enforcement sources tell CNN as many as 50 people may have been involved with the planning and executing of Tuesday's terrorist attacks. Heavily armed officers swarmed the Westin Hotel in Boston's Copley Square yesterday. 3 people described as material witnesses taken into custody. They are among a number of people in Boston and Florida the FBI says it has taken in for questioning. The investigation also has focused on 2 brothers with United Arab Emirates passports whose names were on one of the hijacked plane's manifests. Authorities have searched the Vero Beach, Florida homes of Adnan and Amir Bukhari. The pair received training at a Florida flight school. Authorities say phone records and other evidence may lead to co-conspirators and eventually the mastermind.
We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
Authorities say the people involved in the plot may not have known one another. Carol?
Well, what would you like to know about this attack? You can log on to our homepage to email us your questions, and then you can watch our coverage, and we will ask the experts on the air. The only thing you need to remember is CNN.com. In fact, joining us right now from London is an expert in terrorism. Dr. Magnus Ranstorp is an internationally recognized scholar in the study of terrorism, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, what you know of the details right now of the FBI investigation, as they say as many as 50 people may have been involved in organizing and executing this terrorist plot. What do you make of those numbers? Does that sound realistic to you?
No, I think in terms of the scale and scope of this catastrophic mass casualty terrorism event, that number seems to suggest that there are many nationalities involved and that there were many handlers and teams involved. And I think that very quickly the FBI and the authorities and the intelligence agencies will be able to quickly identify who have been part of these terrible terrorist events.
Mm-hmm. Well, the main suspect being discussed right now in the United States is Osama bin Laden. Do you believe that he is responsible for this terrorist attack?
Well, he has the motivation, he has the capability. If there are several nationalities involved in this attack, it is almost beyond certainty that he has had some responsibility into having at least planned and authorized the attack. And I think that most of the spotlights will be focusing on very quickly on dealing with the problem of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda.
And in terms of dealing with the problem, some of the options the administration is looking at right now, for example, small-scale covert actions targeting bin Laden, or all the way to a broad campaign of bombing. In terms of strategy, what makes sense to go after a man who has been successfully hiding from the United States?
Well, the difficulty is the fact that there is zones of sanctuary for terrorists. Afghanistan is one of the last zones of sanctuary. It is shrinking very fast, and there is very little intelligence information as to the exact whereabouts of where Osama bin Laden is at the present. It would require not only possibly military strikes, but more likely perhaps special operations on the ground in Afghanistan.
And that would mean then, if this were the case, that would mean that Pakistan's support would be absolutely critical for the United States, Pakistan sharing quite a large, broad border with Afghanistan.
Pakistan is going to be absolutely critical, not only in terms of staging these types of operations, but also providing intelligence, because it is also one of the only countries that have officially recognized the Taliban regime, who are right now hosting one of the most wanted men in the world.
And there, Dr. Ranstorp, you point out the problem. Pakistan is one of 3 governments which actually recognizes the Taliban as an official government entity. So what sort of position does this put them in, and how likely is it that Pakistan is going to cooperate with the United States?
It puts Pakistan in a tremendously difficult position, but it's very encouraging that the Pakistani intelligence services is very likely to provide the information that will pinpoint at least where bin Laden may be. But of course, we have geopolitical considerations. It is a very difficult region with a nuclear standoff between Pakistan and India, Afghanistan, and of course the troublesome southern republics of the former Soviet Union bordering Afghanistan. But the zones of sanctuary where bin Laden can be hiding is certainly shrinking. And I think the days are numbered for those who have been responsible for this act.
But what you're suggesting also intact is you're suggesting that not only does the United States have to plan on some sort of air campaign, but you're saying that the United States or perhaps NATO forces have to actually put people on the ground in Afghanistan and go after Osama bin Laden in that manner.
Well, Osama bin Laden is symbolic of a wider problem where you have free-roaming Islamic revolutionaries who have roamed after the end of the war of ending the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. And many of these fighters have shown up in Bosnia, Kashmir, as well as in Chechnya. And there's a whole hierarchy of individuals. So it's not just taking out Osama bin Laden, but also part of his organizational infrastructure.
How big is this organization, Dr. Ransdorp? How big is this organization? How many people are we talking about?
Well, at the top, we are talking about a hierarchical organization. Principally, the top leadership consists of Egyptians, as well as Afghans and Osama bin Laden himself. We're talking there about 25, 30 people in top positions. But of course, we're talking about thousands of other nationalities where Osama bin Laden have been influencing, financing, and trying to utilize for various operations against particularly American targets around the world.
Dr. Ransdorp, then, are you describing an impossible target? You're talking about people of different nationalities in different countries, thousands of people scattered around the world.
Yes, but in terms of the coordination, the orchestration, the planning, the finances, it's an imperative not only to go after bin Laden, but also his top lieutenants. Then, of course, you have to deal with a number of different free-roaming individuals who are scattered. It's going to be a protracted campaign. It's going to take a long time. There's not going to be any quick solutions in terms of just military strikes. But I think that the United States, with the rest of the free and democratic world, will expend every single possible effort to at least resolve and to eliminate part of this problem.
So be as specific as you can, Dr. Ransdorp. How do you see, if there is retaliation for these strikes in the United States, how do you see that retaliation unfolding and over what amount of time?
I think that there is, of course, pressure on the United States to do something, but I think it has been acting very prudently, trying to trace back the chain of events, to try to get as much evidence as possible before the situation becomes very volatile, when the United States may strike back. And of course, it has to have and gather the necessary intelligence, and there I think the Pakistanis will offer invaluable information of the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Magnus Ransdorp, for joining us this morning. Vince?
Well, all across the nation, people have come together seeking comfort and support. Candlelight vigils were held last night, not only in Washington and New York, but in many other U.S. cities. More images now from those gatherings. We offer you some of these pictures of the terrible destruction in New York, and search and rescue efforts have been going for almost 2 straight days now, as rescuers were hoping to find some survivors. Instead, they are confronted through this wreckage with more signs of death, discovering body parts. A nearby building has been set up as a temporary morgue.
That's right, Vince. Right now, 82 people found dead, some 1,500 people being treated at local hospitals in New York, and there shot a live picture of the damage to the Pentagon building where a jetliner crashed into more than half of that structure, penetrating into that structure. The FBI will be on the scene, hand combing through the wreckage. They are trying to find the black box. They are trying to find the recordings, the last moments of exactly what happened in that cockpit out there. And many families standing vigil as well, still waiting and hoping for victims and survivors to emerge.
Trying to look for some clues, some sort of lead. And our coverage of America Under Attack is continuing here. I'm Vince Cellini.
And I'm Carol Lynn. Stay right there. We move on now with more on the search, in fact, and the investigation with the FBI. The work of searching through the massive debris is going on, of course, and CNN's Garrick Utley joins us live from New York with the latest situation there. Morning again, Garrick.
Morning again, Carol. The rescue is underway. It's taking place there at the lower end of Manhattan. I think this scene is quite familiar to all of us right now, and you still see that plume of smoke, some fire still burning there in the region, as well as dust from the rescue effort. The workers there, by the way, are working 12-hour shifts. It's a 24/7 operation and 12-hour shifts, and they are exhausted, but they're being cycled in and out, and there's no let-up. And as you indicated, much of this work is being done very slowly and very carefully, that in addition to the large pieces of concrete, when they move them and they're going through the dust and the rubble, it's being taken out by the bucketful, by the pailful, to make sure that no evidence is lost, and looking also for personal remains and possessions, to be quite frank. A moment ago, you were showing us some of the scenes of candlelight vigils across the country. There are many of them. It's a very moving sight, of course, and there was also one here in New York City, in Washington Square. And those familiar with New York City know Washington Square. It's at the southern end of Fifth Avenue. There's a wonderful late 19th century arch there. It's a popular gathering place in the center, the heart of historic Greenwich Village, which has been known for its poets, its beatniks, its bohemian way of life, its intellectuals. New York University has a campus around there. And this being New York, from time to time, even, yes, the mugger or the drug pusher doing his or her business there. Well, tonight there was a different atmosphere. People were pulling together, all kinds of people. And we wanted to get an impressionistic look of what it was like there from Thomas Nybo of CNN, a producer, who went in with his camera. And this is what he found.
They gathered in a classic New York City park, which lost its classic view of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers. They came for different reasons. Some traded stories of how they heard the news.
The plane came over my building, very low, directly over my building, and I got off the toilet to see it for about 4 or 5 seconds wobble and go directly and disappear into the building.
Others just needed to get out and be with other New Yorkers.
I'm not a joiner and I'm not a group person, but I feel a deep need.
Some are too young to fully understand the terror, while others are in their final years after spending a lifetime in a city that now looks unfamiliar.
I'm on my way out, and this is their world now. And boy, what I saw today, I am not at all worried about this country.
Thomas Nybo, CNN, New York.
And no doubt there are going to be more of these vigils, candlelight or without candles, across the country for days to come, as the waiting continues to see how many possibly could have survived this terrorist attack. Carol, back to you now.
All right, thank you very much, Garrick Utley, reporting live from New York. In the meantime, the U.S. ambassador to Pakistan has given the government in Islamabad a choice. It will be either stand with the United States or Afghanistan. Pakistan is one of only 3 nations that recognizes the Islamic fundamentalist Taliban government as rulers of Afghanistan. CNN's Tom Antier is in Islamabad with more on this meeting. Tom, I thought that the military ruler in Pakistan had already pledged support. Unstinted cooperation is what he said yesterday. How much further does the U.S. ambassador need to take this?
Yes.
Tom and Tier?
Well, I think it's gone a step further than unstinted cooperation. It is, we are with you. We are with you was the message that the American ambassador received this morning. She was at the president's office to present her credentials, one of 5 nations here in Pakistan presenting their credentials today for their new ambassador. Wendy Chamberlain has been the ambassador here in Islamabad for about a month, but this was probably the most time she has spent with a Pakistani president and did receive a message back. There was a phone call last night between U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell and the Pakistani president, but today the message was plain and clear to the American ambassador from the Pakistani leadership.
President made a very strong statement that he was with us, and I think that's probably all I'm able to say at this point. But let me just say that it was positive, it was strong. He repeated several times during the meeting that he was with us.
He is with us is something that the U.S. ambassador said not once but twice. Now, the people who are not there anymore is in Kabul. Many of the UN and diplomats and aid workers have made their way out, flying on UN flights here. The UN planes are pretty small, so it only takes about 15 people. So more than 40 people came out this morning. They expect 3 additional flights this afternoon as aid workers and diplomats come out. The German embassy has told its citizens they must leave Afghanistan, so some of the German aid workers were there. Also, there are 8 international residents that are in custody in Afghanistan awaiting trial on preaching Christianity in Afghanistan. They, of course, are there, but those who are assisting them and representing the nations involved are now leaving Afghanistan and coming here to Pakistan. So we expect at least 3 more flights of aid workers coming out this afternoon, and there's also some convoys coming out of Kabul trying to make their way out. There was also a rather important meeting last night between the senior leaders of the Taliban and the Pakistani government. This was a meeting to really determine where both sides stood. There was concern from the Pakistani, according to diplomatic sources here in Islamabad, that the Taliban had not condemned the attack on the United States in strong enough language. The Taliban responded to the Pakistanis that there was difficulty in the translation of the word, not using the word condemned, but criticized. So they held another press conference and used the word condemned. The Taliban has a real problem because they still have Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan, the problem being his presence there. And there is, I'm sure, grave concern in Kabul and the rest of Afghanistan what his presence is going to mean should and when the U.S. decides that military action is going to be used. And it should also be pointed out that in that support by the Pakistani government, that may mean that the airspace in Pakistan could be used if there is a military attack against the Taliban and Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. Carol?
So, Tom, I want to be perfectly clear. I only have less than a minute in your satellite window. You're saying that Pakistan is considering allowing the United States or NATO to use their soil to launch military operations against the Taliban or against Osama bin Laden if necessary.
Well, they haven't gone so far as to say use the soil, but in this unqualified support for the U.S. action against terrorism would probably mean a green light to use the airspace. Using the ground may be something totally different and not yet discussed. We'll have to wait and see.
All right, thank you very much. Tom Mintier reporting from Pakistan. Vince?
It is around 20 minutes before the hour of 6 a.m. in the east. We want to show you a live shot now of New York and certainly the site of Ground Zero, the cleanup that continues as New Yorkers will again wake up to this grim picture where the World Trade Center towers at one time stood and other buildings are severely damaged in that area. Also, we want to provide you with a live picture here of the Pentagon. And we were hoping to get that shot where we saw the American flag. It's a little wider shot here on the right of the screen, and it's draped down almost fully covering that 5-story wall on the Pentagon there. So very symbolic is that gesture as well as the rebuilding begins. Well, President Bush got a personal look at that burned out gash in the Pentagon. CNN's Candy Crowley looks at the White House in the hours immediately following the attack.
At daybreak, the nightmare was still there, smoldering and burning, defying the imagination, thwarting rescue efforts, and testing an untested president.
The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination.
8 months in office, President George Bush is already writing what may be the most important page of his own legacy. In an unusual revelation, officials said both the White House and Air Force One may have been targets. The news sheds some light on the president's first hours following the attacks when, instead of returning immediately to Washington, he flew from Florida to a military base in Louisiana and then another in Nebraska. At the Pentagon, hope is gone. Officials say whoever might have survived the concussion of the plane's impact could not have lived through the fires that came after. There's no official estimate of how many lives were lost at the Pentagon or the World Trade Center. Authorities say they don't know, but everybody knows it will be awful. The FBI says it's identified most of the suicidal terrorists on the planes. Now they search for those behind the mayhem.
We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
It is a very public manhunt. The FBI conducted a shoulder-to-shoulder search for evidence outside the Pentagon. A SWAT team descended on a Boston hotel in search of suspects. No arrests were made. Authorities also searched a Vero Beach, Florida home and questioned others in the southern Florida area. Terrorism's reach goes far beyond the areas of immediate destruction. The nation's airliners still aren't flying as the FAA institutes new security requirements and carriers search for ways to comply. Wall Street remains closed. The totality of the loss is incomprehensible, but the details are unbearable.
Someone on the 104th floor worked for the good firm of Cantor and Fitzgerald. We can't find hardly anybody from that firm who called his parents, told him he loved him, and they haven't heard from him since.
There are stories like it everywhere. People, knowing they are about to die, calling home to say, "I love you." People running for their lives and then stopping to carry a stranger to safety. The story here is that what prevailed in the final moment, in the face of death, is not fear or hate, but love and courage. Candy Crowley, CNN, Washington.
President Bush has called this an act of war, and he is working with the military to draw up different options in terms of a response. And he is asking for Congress to help as well. CNN's White House correspondent Kelly Wallace standing by this morning with more on that. Morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Carol. Well, we know negotiations went late into the night between White House officials and lawmakers over the wording of what would be a congressional resolution authorizing the U.S. to retaliate for the 4 deadly terrorist attacks. Now, we expect those negotiations to continue today. Some White House officials comparing this use of force resolution to the resolution passed by the Congress back in 1991 authorizing Mr. Bush's father to take military action against Iraq after the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. There you're looking at a live picture of the U.S. Capitol. Lawmakers and administration officials, again, likely to be hard at work over negotiations over that resolution today. Meantime, Carol, we are seeing really throughout the country and also here in Washington the feelings of people here about the tremendous tragedy that we have all witnessed. Last night, we saw some hundreds of Washington residents turn out for a candlelight vigil in front of the White House. There were people holding candles, some carrying American flags, waving flags as you see there, others singing, obviously reflecting the tremendous sadness about what this country has seen. Now, as for President Bush, he issued a statement last night saying that he was saddened and outraged by the loss of life. He has also called on all agency heads to excuse any federal employees without loss of pay from duty if they can't get to work because of what we have seen in these deadly terrorist attacks, or if they are facing a personal emergency, or if they have been called on by law enforcement or search and rescue teams to participate and try and help. Mr. Bush has also, as we've been reporting, been working the phones, trying to build what the White House is calling an international coalition against terrorism. Mr. Bush telephoning on Wednesday the leaders of Britain, France, Germany, Canada, China, and Russia, likely to work the phone some more. The White House also very much gratified by a statement which came out of NATO on Wednesday, which basically said that an attack on one member of the alliance alliance amounts to an attack on the full alliance. Now, Carol, one question we've been asking White House officials is if the U.S. is seeking any military support from other nations if and when it decides to retaliate. White House officials refuse to answer that question, but clearly we are seeing the White House trying to get some backing for any retaliation it might take, and also for sort of a broader attack against terrorism worldwide. Carol, back to you.
Kelly, give us a perspective on how quickly the political machinery can work here. Some terrorism experts CNN has been speaking to throughout the morning are predicting that if there is a retaliatory strike, it will not be in a matter of hours, days, or even weeks, that this could take quite some time. Given all the negotiations and the conversations that the Bush administration is having, what is your sense of any sort of timetable for response?
It's a hard question to answer, Carol. It appears from the words from President Bush and Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and others that whatever the U.S. does will take time. You heard President Bush say yesterday that this is a battle that is going to take time, but in the end, the U.S. will win. The feeling we get is that certainly that the president would like to act somewhat swiftly, but hearing from some sources, the U.S. definitely wanting to, A, build a case, make sure, A, it determines exactly who is responsible for these attacks, build some evidence, again, to get that international backing. And then, Carol, there is this bigger concern that whatever the U.S. decides to do, it not only wants to sort of take out those responsible for these attacks, but to make sure these don't happen again, so to have a stronger attack on terrorism worldwide. So clearly, I think even Defense Secretary Rumsfeld sending a taped message to the military indicating that U.S. forces around the world will be called upon to deal with terrorism, so a sense that anything the U.S. does could certainly take time. So exactly, I'm not answering your question. It's a difficult one to answer. It appears the U.S. likely to respond somewhat quickly, but that maybe this will be a prolonged assault against terrorism around the world.
That's right, Kelly. I know you did answer the question. I think it is a complicated process, and for so many people who are feeling so much emotion today, I think it gives us certainly a better sense of what the administration is doing and the challenges that they face. Thank you. Kelly Wallace at the White House. Vince?
President Bush has met with congressional leaders seeking a quick agreement on an emergency spending bill for recovery and rebuilding efforts. The attacks have galvanized Congress into one cohesive body.
The American people need to know this is a long, hard struggle. It wouldn't be over if we got rid of Mr. bin Laden tomorrow. There are other organizations that are bent on the destruction of the United States of America. And in order for us to preserve America and our way of life, we're going to have to sacrifice American treasure and, unfortunately, in some cases, perhaps some American blood.
I believe this is a time for us to pull together as a Congress and a country. I am moved by the bravery and patriotism of our people in this time of national calamity, and I believe that working closely together, all of us together, will meet this challenge just as we've met every challenge in the history of our country.
But meeting that challenge with a very measured response today. You listen to the talk radio shows and you hear a lot of people expressing their anger and their grief, and it's
strike quickly, and
but it's shocking what you hear people saying.
It really is.
I think people are just having a very visceral response. Certainly, when you see the pictures coming out of Washington and out of New York of the damage there.
Yes.
Garrick Utley has that position up top of our New York bureau. Morning, Garrick. The rescue operation still going on through the night?
They certainly are. As we said a moment ago, this is a 24/7, every day, every morning, noon, afternoon, and night operation. The workers, again, fire department people, other volunteers brought in, specialists dealing with situations like this to make sure that not too much of the structure falls in places it shouldn't fall as they go about with their search. They're obviously exhausted. They're physically whipped. They're emotionally whipped. There's no question about that. You just have to look at these pictures. We've seen them before, and we'll see them again. And there's some of the work that's going on. You see the big unit. That one tug of that crane brought down about 4 stories of rubble right there. Now, obviously, that wasn't brought down until they had made every effort with dogs trying to sniff out any signs of human life or indeed human death, or motion detectors, which they also have there, had gone through and examined those areas and found no one there. But again, even under the floodlights powered by very strong generators, which are allowing this work through the evening, it has to be said that all of the dedication is there, no one speaks of optimism, simply because of the time factor. As hard as these people are going to be working, they're talking about 30 days to 60 days minimum to get through the rubble. And I don't have to spell out what that means in terms of the chances of finding many survivors. Several thousand body bags have been brought in. I think it's up to 6,000. The mayor and others have said only the total will probably be in the thousands. The triage center is there to separate those who may be found to have survived, and there were very few who were recovered on Wednesday and into the evening hours. But again, there can't be that much hope. And we can only think, Carol and Vince, as we look at these pictures, whether you're here in the United States or somewhere around the world right now, that if there are indeed thousands there who may or indeed have lost their lives, there are also thousands of families here in New York City and the greater New York area waiting, still somehow trying to hold on to hope and knowing that someday or at some point they're going to have to let that hope slip away. And these are the scenes that have been familiar. This was, of course, right after the terrorist attack.
Garrett,
this is when New
excuse
York
me,
was in shock.
I don't mean to interrupt. We were supposed to have an election there in New York for mayor.
Oh, that's been long. That's long forgotten right now.
And I wanted. My point is that Mayor Giuliani has been very visible through this, and he's had kind of a calming effect, or at least trying to keep things as orderly as possible there. I wonder if you could talk about the job he's done in trying to guide some of these citizens in New York City.
Well, certainly there is a mayoral election coming up. Mayor Giuliani cannot run for a third term. He's had his 2 terms, so he's not involved in any of the political equation here. He has been quite visible. He's been a very effective mayor, certainly, like him or not, and the city has been rather evenly divided on that score. But in exercising a calm and a discipline and also a certain prudence, Vince, as we've reported before, and as we all know, the city officials or state or even federal officials are not going to give any predictions. They're not going to go out and say this is exactly what we think has happened, but they are giving general guidelines. And of course, those guidelines, as we said a moment ago, to use the mayor's word, are, quote, horrendous, unquote. And there's really not much more that can be said about this. New Yorkers are digesting what has happened here. They know, but that doesn't ease the pain.
No, certainly not. Garrick, people have described the aura in the city as one of an uncomfortable silence. What is that like to be in this city now where people are not going to work, are not going about their daily business? I just can't imagine.
Well, that was certainly true on Tuesday after the initial chaos of the terrorist attacks. Tuesday night was very quiet. Wednesday was quite quiet. You could get on a bus, or if you had a car, just drive down most of the avenues and only have to stop for the red lights. There were no traffic jams at all because the bridges and the tunnels were closed and people were told not to come to work. Schools were closed. But what's happening right now is the start of return to a more normal life for New York, and indeed here in Manhattan, the heart of New York City. Schools will be opening tomorrow. The bridges, more of them, will be opened up. And the quiet that we have enjoyed, if we can even use the word enjoy under these circumstances, will be disappearing as life returns to its normal rhythm. But you're absolutely right, Carol, in pointing this out. To be in a city of more than 7 million people, imagine that, and still have this sense of quiet, this sense of restraint even, and still plenty of emotion pouring out. This was unique in New York City.
Sure, absolutely. As one reporter described it, it feels like the protected aura of a war zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're really
Garrick Utley.
Thank you, Garrick Utley. Well, the number of lives affected is certainly enormous. CNN's Natalie Pawlowski provides some glimpses into the aftermath for those affected by the tragedy around the country.
In a small New England town, neighbors leave flowers in remembrance of their neighbor John Ogonowski, the pilot of American Flight 11, the first plane to crash Tuesday. He was the father of 3 and a farmer on the side.
Our family is obviously grieving, as is the whole nation, for what has happened today. I keep looking at the cornfield behind me, hoping that my brother comes walking on out.
At a church in Northern California, prayers for Thomas Burnett, chief operating officer of a medical equipment company. He had 3 children. He managed a last phone call to his wife before United Flight 93 crashed into the Pennsylvania countryside.
And he said that somebody was already dead, that they had stabbed somebody, and that they were all going to die, and that they were going to try to do something. And he said, "I love you," and that was the end of the conversation.
Amy Jarrett of Rhode Island was a flight attendant aboard United Flight 175, the second plane to hit the World Trade Center. So was Al Marchand of New Mexico, who just retired from police work to start a new airborne career.
You just recently retired, and you hope the best for people in their retirements to be able to enjoy a retirement. This is it's unjust.
And at a mass in Vermont, a bishop forgives the people who killed his brother, David Angel, executive producer of the show Frasier, and his wife Lynn.
I don't understand people that can perpetuate such violence and such misery and all. But they're God's children too, so I forgive them and pray for them.
A sentiment so many Americans are finding impossible to echo. Natalie Pavelski, CNN.
Well, from shock to outrage, unbelievable grief, the scenes of rescue and recovery in New York tell stories of heroism and heartbreak.
That's right, and at the Pentagon, all-out efforts on 3 fronts: finding survivors, protecting the nation, and seeking out the people behind the terror. Good morning. It is Thursday, September 13th, and I'm Carol Lynn at the CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Vince Cellini.
We have, of course, Vince, affiliates around the country, some 500 affiliates who are helping this network cover this story. And they have captured some images that are stunning and that are touching in so many ways. We're going to share with you some of those images, and we're also going to let you listen in on a prayer that a Capitol Hill police officer led at a prayer vigil in the center of the Capitol building, that is the Rotunda, singing Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious deep that grace appear. The hour I first believed, through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have